Hey everyone, I'm Zane. I'm a former cheesemaker and now business services coordinator here at Caputo Brothers Creamery, which is really just a fancy way of saying my hands are in a bit of everything here. With COVID-19 driving multitudes of people to take on the introvert lifestyle, welcome to the club, please wash your hands. I figured this might be a good time to share and try my hand at a simple recipe or two I've learned about during my time here, while maybe adding a semi-educational spin on it. To be fully transparent, I have absolutely no professional cooking experience or expertise. Like, there are people who are way more qualified than I am to make this video, but I've always enjoyed cooking for friends and family at home and studying the science behind our food and cooking. Quick shout out to my WCU Physics 123 Food, Fire, and Physics family. Easily one of the coolest things I've learned about traditional Italian food during my time here is that a lot of it is pretty much simple peasant food, made with only a small handful of ingredients that exponentially build off of each other. This dish in particular, Orecchiette with tomatoes, pesto, and burrata, is a great demonstration of that concept. This recipe in particular is taken directly from Katy Parla's Food of the Italian South. While this is first and foremost a cookbook, Parla has done an awesome job to include historical context and insights along these disappearing recipes. I found myself getting lost in the pages and pictures of this beautiful cookbook more than a few times. Plus, Parla offers a ton of resources to buy some of the more traditional and harder to find ingredients, including a shout out to us for mozzarella, ricotta, and other traditionally made Italian cheeses. So, obviously she clearly knows what she's talking about. In short, I can't recommend this book enough. Now on to the actual recipe. For this recipe, which I've slightly modified in regards to ratio of ingredients, we'll need, in no particular order, extra virgin olive oil, anywhere from 2 to 4 cups of cherry tomatoes, a half teaspoon of dried oregano, a quarter cup of almonds, enough fresh basil to loosely pack 1 cup, some Parmigiano-Reggiano, 1 pound of fresh or dried orecchiette, and sea or kosher salt for stretching cheese, and our pasta water. Side note about the olive oil, transferring oil into a squeeze bottle like this one here helps to easily control how much oil you use. Oh yeah, and you'll also need mozzarella curd to make some delicious burrata. First, you'll want to start off by preheating your oven to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Additionally, start heating up about 1.5 to 2 gallons of water to 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Next, we'll start off with making a ball of mozzarella to turn into creamy burrata, or technically stracciatella. I'll get to that in a bit. Place a 1 pound bag of thawed CapoMozz, our fermented frozen cheese curd, into a bowl. Next, you'll want to add 1 to 2 to 3 tablespoons of sea or kosher salt. Please don't sue us, Tootsie Pop. And don't worry, most of the salt will get washed out. Tear the chunks of curd into quarter-ish sized pieces. Going smaller than this might lead to a tighter ball of mozzarella. Pour in your 190 degree Fahrenheit water directly onto the curds until they're just covered up, and vigorously stir with a spoon for 20 seconds. This first shot of water only tempers the curd to get them ready for stretching for a second shot of water coming up here shortly. If you start to notice melty strings forming in your curd soup, don't worry, that's expected. Now that the curds are tempered, dump the contents of your bowl into a strainer to remove excess water and place the curds back in the bowl. If you're new to the process, you'll want to keep 1/4 to 1/3 of your water in the bowl to avoid overheating the curd with the second shot of water. At this point, I like to lightly pat the curd into a more coherent mass, which will help the curds to stretch after adding our second shot of 190 degree Fahrenheit water. You want to pour along the sides of the bowl as opposed to directly on the curd this time around, otherwise you may end up with a hot spot that could actually start to cook the cheese as it stretches. Once your water's in, use a spoon to slowly push the edges of your cheesy globule towards the center, coercing it into more of a coherent mass. Once it's a massier, mass, start to lift up from under the curd, allowing it to slowly stretch under its own weight. This may take a few tries, but the key is to not leave it out of the hot water for too long. If you feel like it's not stretching or too tight, feel free to add more hot water, just don't overdo it. An easy key to stretching is, if it feels tight and stiff, add more heat. If it feels soupy and you can't hold it, let it chill out for a bit from the hot water. Eventually you'll start to get a solid stretch going, and you should be able to stretch it by hand. If your hands start to feel too hot, there's no shame in running them under cold water. You're looking to stretch out about 80% of the rough curd bits into smooth cheese. Going beyond this will make for a less supple cheese. Now for the finisher. If you're watching just to make burrata, you can actually skip this step by pulling your mozzarella into a long rope and tearing away at it like you would a giant piece of string cheese. However, I figured I'd go the full mile and show you how we would do this in-house. Once you've reached the desired consistency, shape the melty cheese into a ball. You can do this by picking it all up and folding the mass in and under on itself as if you're folding a pair of socks. The goal here is to make a ball shape held together by a single layer of shiny cheese on the outside. Last is the tear, which gives mozzarella its name since muzzare means to tear. As demonstrated with my extremely dry, yet now squeaky clean hands, make a C shape with both of your hands for your desired ball size. Teehee. Use your non-dominant hand to squeeze down and form a tight neck on the underside of the ball. Then with your dominant hand, reach over and pinch the neck in between your index finger and the base of your thumb. As this happens, you should start to feel the neck begin to tear, which you'll finish with your best mozzare by simply moving your hands away from each other. A clean tear will give you a ball of mozzarella that doesn't leak out any fluids, which is important if you're trying to get the most out of your mozz. If you don't get a solid tear this time around, don't worry about it. It's a skill that takes a fair amount of practice to get right. Now, if we were making sliced mozzarella, we'd finish by placing the ball in a water bath to firm up just enough to retain its shape. But no, we're about to turn this already tasty ball of cheese into something even greater, as it's time now to make burrata. To clarify, Parla's recipe calls for burrata, which is torn mozzarella soaked in cream, also known as stracciatella or strings, which is then stuffed in a ball of mozzarella. What we're actually after here is the stracciatella, which burrata is really just the packaging for. But for the sake of this video, I'll just call it burrata. With that in mind, we'll now take our beautiful, plump little pillow of hard-earned mozzarella and tear it apart. You're looking to pull apart all of your mozzarella like string cheese into strands no longer than 2 to 3 inches. The key is to make bite-sized pieces that will work with the size of the pasta. Now, Parla calls for 7 ounces in this recipe, but I ended up going way over that since I love me some burrata. Once that's nice and pulled apart, you're going to take some heavy cream and drown the cheese in it. Seriously, don't be stingy. Go till your cheese is covered up and then go a hair further. Now you're going to add a healthy portion of salt. The cream adds a sweet taste, so adding salt will help to counterbalance that. I ended up using almost a tablespoon in this mix, which admittedly was a little heavy at first, but that's okay since you can always add more cream to balance it out later. Now you're going to set that aside at room temperature to thicken up. Not only is the cream absorbing the cheese, but because our cheese is cultured, those cultures are still active and will start to eat the lactose in the cream, causing it to thicken. If you let it sit out long enough, you'll actually get creme fraiche. One particular note here is that if you've forgone using our cheese and bought something else, this might not work. Fact is, most mozzarella on the market is made with vinegar or citric acid, and therefore technically isn't real cheese. With the burrata waiting in the wings, we'll break out the cutting board and rinse in half our cherry tomatoes. As Parla points out, using different colored tomatoes will add depth of color to your dish and make for a more appealing meal. We eat with our eyes after all. Place the tomatoes in a bowl and add in a half teaspoon of dried oregano before coating in about 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. Mix together and place on a tray, making sure everything is nice and spread out, and place in your preheated oven for 90 minutes or until shriveled and dry. Now on to the pesto. First, you'll want to finely grate at least 2 tablespoons of Parmigiano-Reggiano, but there's absolutely no shame in going further than that. Then you'll want to rinse and pick enough basil to loosely pack 1 cup, and then finally chop a 1/4 cup of almonds. Don't be afraid of going overboard on the chopping. Now, when I make pesto, I normally use a food processor, which you're more than welcome to use. However, Parla calls for using a mortar and pestle, so I decided to give it a try. After all, I have one at my disposal that I've never used, and I think the same can be said for a lot of households. Also, as Rin informed me after I recorded, the stone-on-stone mortar and pestle is really just an American thing, which makes total sense because this sound gets old really quick. Plus, the stone-on-stone can cause marble flakes to break off into your mix, so if you can, use wood on marble for a less annoying, safer experience. Combine your chopped almonds, a 1/4 cup of the basil, and a healthy pinch of salt and do the pesto mash. I don't really know if there's a proper technique here, but you'll want to crush, smash, and combine everything together until the dry mix is just hydrated. At this point, slowly add in extra virgin olive oil, about 3+ tablespoons or as much as you need, and mix together until you have a smooth, saucy paste, making sure to stretch out your arms as needed. By the time you're done with this pesto, you'll have worked off enough calories to offset your pasta. Taste as you go with your non-stirring hand that can actually grip a tasting spoon, and once the desired taste and consistency is reached, mix in your finely grated Parmigiano and set aside. I actually messed this step up and added the cheese before it was done, hence the color, but it was still pretty good. I've made pesto plenty of times before, but I've never been as satisfied with a pesto like this until now, so I have to recommend trying this at least once. The way the oils from the basil are broken down and absorbed into the paste without being overheated makes a big impact on the taste. With a few minutes left on the tomatoes, I'm going to get my orecchiette going since I'm using dry pasta. If you're using fresh pasta, you may want to wait until your tomatoes are ready to go. Once I have a rolling boil of salted water going, I'll toss in a pound of pasta, making sure to show that non-sponsored label, occasionally stirring and tasting for 11-ish minutes or until al dente. Something to note here, since I see people asking about this all the time, what does adding salt to pasta water actually do? While it does just barely raise the temperature water boils at, the biggest reason is pretty simple. It seasons the pasta. So if you're using a fresh pasta, you'll want to heavily salt your water since it won't have as much cooking and seasoning time in the water as a dry would. While my orecchiette are hanging out in the pot, my tomatoes are ready to come out of the oven. You may notice that a few tomatoes aren't as shriveled as the rest, and that's because I realized there were a few left over that I forgot about, so I threw them in last minute. It's no big deal though, they're still pretty tasty. Set aside in a bowl and get ready to toss these in some pasta. Now that the orecchiette is where we want it, I'm going to kill the heat, take the pasta out, and place in a serving bowl. Say hi to Dave, making an awesome St. Patrick's Day meal in the back. Parla calls for first coating the pasta in pesto and then adding in the tomatoes and burrata, but I kinda just threw in everything at once. You can top off the pasta as is with freshly torn basil, plus some leftover Parmigiano for good measure, and serve as is, or plate and then top off first like I did here. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is how good this dish is, cause shnikes, this is awesome. Every ingredient plays off of each other perfectly. This is a type of dish where everything is essential, nothing goes unnoticed, and nothing goes to waste, which to me is the essence of traditional Italian food. If you're laying low at home and have the ability to safely get a hold of these ingredients, this is definitely worth a stab. Now is as good a time as any to try something new in the kitchen. Like, try making something with a kitchen tool you've had for years and never used. Make a sourdough or some homemade pasta, or maybe even try to stretch some mozzarella at home, hint hint, wink wink. This entire recipe was a first for me, it turned out awesome, and I'm absolutely glad I gave it the stab I did. On that note, if you liked the video, let us know by liking, sharing, and subscribing if applicable. And if you end up making this recipe at home, let us know about it. Seriously, send us pictures, videos, whatever, show us what you got. Now if you don't mind me, I'm gonna take my plate here and practice some social distancing. Go wash your hands.